yes, the numbers matter for sure. But what matters even more is stable living. Stable living is like where the inflammation stops and where the stress stops and where rolling over in bed stops with where am I going to get my next meal, or man, my rent is due tomorrow, my mortgage is due tomorrow. And, wage has been trailing, our income wage has been trailing the median home price for years. And the median home price only continues to inflate. As you might be a homeowner, understand, our taxes are not ever going to go the other way. Our maintenance costs are never going to go the other way. All of our costs associated with ownership are continuing to increase over time. And everywhere else too, our food systems, our childcare systems, our healthcare system, they're not even connected to the house. So housing is only a part of the model, and we have to think about this as an operating system, not just housing tied to capital markets.
Welcome to Housing Matters, the podcast that covers everything real estate, from buying your first home to building your investment portfolio. Hosted by me, Matt Pouliot of Pouliot Real Estate, each episode brings expert insights, smart strategies, and real talk on housing and affordability. If it's about real estate, it matters here. Welcome to Housing Matters. We're thrilled to have joining us today Chris Moeller. He's the creator of the Pathway Communities model and a systems thinker focused on the future of living. As CEO of Orion Growth, he works at the intersection of housing, energy, and technology, reimagining how communities are built to reduce the total cost of living and increase long-term stability. After living through Hurricane Helene, his work took a new level of urgency, shifting from improving housing to designing systems that can withstand disruption and support recovery. His approach challenges traditional real estate by focusing on adaptive reuse and regenerative communities built for resilience, not just for return. Chris, I've been following closely a lot of the stuff that you've got going on social media. You're a frequent commenter on LinkedIn posts, and really just trying to bring about more best practices and really a thought leader in this space. I'm really thrilled to have you joining us today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Cool. Well, we'll jump right into it. We won't keep people waiting anymore. You spent over 2 decades in real estate and entrepreneurship, and your focus has been on financial and also on the development side of the industry. Could you walk us through your background and what led you to focus on housing, sustainability, and community development?
Yeah, sure. So, specifically my focus was on office. So I was sort of a workplace subject matter expert working on workplace strategy and workplace experience. And I recognized kind of before COVID that the workplace was off. Something was just sort of amiss. Attendance was low, productivity was slowing down. Folks were really starting to wonder why they couldn't do their work from home. And then COVID, the shutdown really proved that our systems were kind of ready to allow folks to have the agency to work in a distributed way. So it shifted to home. My focus shifted to home. It made me realize that the future of work was really closer to the intersection of the future of housing and future of living. So I started down the path of platforms and technology, became pretty heavy on Microsoft infrastructure because they had, global infrastructure at the enterprise level, started studying the architecture and engineering associated with the plumbing behind remote work. And then on May 27th of 2024, that fateful day, Hurricane Helene came, and I happened to be in the storm. So at that point, after the focus and shift of distributed work came, I started to realize how inferior our infrastructure was for resilience, whether it was work or living. And that just further sort of compelled me into the path of building housing and building resilient communities.
Okay. Well, that leads really well into Orion Growth, and you're approaching housing differently with your organization, differently than traditional developers. Could you describe what Orion Growth does for those listening, and also what makes your approach distinct than more kind of traditional real estate models?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say that, everything is emerging right now. I think we all feel this sort of seismic shift underneath us, and certain things age well and certain things don't age well in the age of agentic design. So, Orion Growth is very much emerging as an OpCo, PropCo company, meaning
What do you mean
that
by that?
Yeah, meaning that we are going to be invested on both sides of the ledger. So as a property company, we have a responsibility, and as an operating company, we have a responsibility. Whereas heretofore, I think a lot of GPLP agreements were sort of separated. You had a lane, you swam in, and you stayed in that lane. We're kind of blurring the edge there, and really trying to take a swing at the OpCo PropCo model to be involved on both sides, culpable on both sides of the equation. Um,
And for those
so
listening that might not be familiar with the terms, when you say OpCo, you mean more on the management side of the assets?
that's right. Yeah. So traditionally speaking, when you looked at a regular deal, there was a general partner and some limited partners. And then after the asset was online, generally you would hire somebody to come in and manage or broker whatever the management or sale of those assets. We're really kind of trying to blend into that a little bit more and have some responsibility on both sides to ensure that the asset not only gets built right, but it actually operates correctly.
Mm. Yeah, and that is a key component to making sure housing stays, we'll say attainable. I use the term attainable on this because affordable, it means different things to different people, but at a rate that people can attain in the market that's being served. A lot of times people, when they third party manage, right, they lose some of the control over the asset on the expense side of things. And then they just make up for it by jacking up rents, which might not be attainable for people that are in that environment. And I see this model a lot, actually get reached out to by a lot of people, and I'm kind of curious what you think about it. There are these value add investors that will go in, buy a building, basically just put down new laminate tops, paint the walls, and maybe swap out someone's toilet, and then jack the rent up 250 or $300. And they go around like piranha. And forgive me if this is what you do, but I just tell it like it is, because I don't think it's what you do from what I can see. They go around and they're just like, put lipstick on a pig, let's say, and find an operator that basically was just keeping people's rents super low because it was easier for them to not fix it up than to change it out. They come in, they put the lipstick, jack the rent up 250 or $300. It's like, what makes you think that these people can afford this overnight? It pushes people out. They know that there's enough demand for the units, and then it brings in people that will, and then these other people who were there, they're left displaced and they can't find anything else because the rents are too dang high everywhere.
Yeah. So, on that point, right now we really don't have too many options in America. We can rent, or if we're lucky enough and qualified enough to have access to a mortgage, we can own. And they both have their values and detriments, in my opinion. If you need flexibility and autonomy, or you're trying to stay short term, rent's a great idea. But if that's your long term play, it's kind of painful, right? So what we're trying to do is bridge that gap between ownership and renting, and not focus on NOI as much, but think about how can we create affordable housing models for ownership with a lowercase a. So it's really attainable housing and an ownership model along the way.
So that leads right into what I was wanting to ask you next. Was maybe we could dig a little bit more into the model, because your work challenges these traditional assumptions, which I love. I'm kind of a hacker at heart. Doesn't doesn't mean nothing to date that's been done isn't good to build on, but sometimes it just needs tweaks. Can you kind of like look at what the current model gets wrong essentially, and where do you see the biggest opportunities to rethink it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've tied everything to rent and price, but ignored the total cost of living.
Mm.
And, looking at housing as an operating system rather than an asset class is kind of an interesting reposition. When you have an all-inclusive rent and you have autonomy and agency because you're paying one bill, there's comfort in that. That's just one check that comes out. You don't have to worry about the air conditioner if it breaks or a leak in the roof, right? So you probably should pay maybe a little bit more to defray that risk back onto the property management company or the landlord. But when you are in an ownership model, that management fee, quote unquote, or maintenance cost is on you. So, nothing breaks at the right time. You never look at your air conditioning or heating system and say, man, this is a great time to spend 15
It's
grand. Or,
always
wow.
on Saturday at 7 p.m. when it's a double and a half time charge to fix
Right.
it.
Exactly. Or like, wow, what an amazing time for there to be a leak in the roof. Like I just happen to have 20 grand to put into a
Yeah.
roof leak right now.
Baby was born last week. Get
Yeah.
the buckets out.
Right. So, I think the biggest miss that we have right now economically is that we're pricing the very people out that we rely on the most from the ownership model of things. They tend to be the less qualified folks, or they're working at AMI, 80% AMI, or even, more. And they just don't have the ability or privilege, quite frankly, to get into an ownership model. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity somewhere in between in the middle.
So how might you present that to a consumer in your case, who's coming to you and saying, "Hey, look, I'm approved to buy a property up to $300,000," but in that approval, they're doing it based on that's going to be 30% of my income because all of these other things need to go. I mean, do you sit down? We kind of talked about this on one episode with a guest that we had who was an energy auditor or had
Mhm,
that in her repertoire.
mhm.
And what the appraisers don't reflect is the efficiencies of homes in terms of the value. So, like, how do you cross that bridge with people? Like, hey, this home you could actually afford to get a loan for 350 because the other assumptions they're making, you're not going to pay those here. Is that the level that you guys go to, or what does it look like?
Yeah, let me back up to our resident profile first, because I think it's probably most important for you to understand the on ramp and the off ramp.
Yeah, thanks.
We're specifically building for civil servants right now,
Okay.
so teachers, police, fire, medic, nurses, because right now they're the ones who are suffering sort of the most. They're underpaid. They're absolutely underappreciated, and they can't live and work and serve in the communities in which they're working. So we need to somehow anchor a stable living model. That's our thesis, is that if we can get that nurse that just got out of school into a stable living model right at the beginning of their on ramp to the workforce, we can maybe stabilize them for the next decade, and then progress them, out. That's the goal. Life will progress. Of a partner or a dog or something, life challenge will move them to the next spot, but we'd like them to leave with something in their pocket rather than simply the extractive NOI, built to operating efficiencies. Um, so that's the on ramp is for civil servants at the beginning of their career. Conversely, at the end of one's career is an age in place model. We've got a massive aging population right now. Um, I don't have to go too far into Social Security benefits to know that we're already tapping into the trust, and we have not yet even hit our peak in terms of folks receiving benefits. I think that number is 2036. So we're
Hmm.
trying to get ahead of the age in place model for folks that do want an option to get out of their family home and move into something more right sized, very similar to the way that their life was when they entered the workforce.
Hmm. Yeah, and the irony of the situation that we're in with an aging population and underproduction for decades now in this country is that there hasn't been the smaller homes to start on and also then to go back to. A lot of the production builders have been making their money in the kind of the upgrade house, because there's a little bit more square footage and it's not that much more to put in another wall or whatever, but it's the same cost to put in the foundation and the well and septic or the water and sewer hookups. And I find like in Maine, we have the oldest population in the US. Well, sometimes Florida beats us. It's not anything that someone wants to win at, usually, unless they're running AARP. It's a great place to get more members. But, like we have this problem. And I just yesterday was meeting with a guy who's considering selling his home. And it's a simple Cape style home. You've seen these are a dime a dozen, your 1,200 square foot, maybe started with the second floor and finished when these places were built in the 1950s. So you really only had like 950 square foot maybe on the first floor. And then over time, people would put a couple extra bedrooms or maybe put a dormer and a bathroom or whatever. I mean, this is the classic thing. We could use a bunch more of those, but they haven't been added since these subdivisions in our market were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s because the building codes were different. So you could actually deliver to market, a 1,200 square foot Cape home for a price that people could afford on the wages in the area, and now you can't.
Mhm.
So here's a situation where this guy is ready to kind of like move on, and it would be a great upstart home for him, except for he's for someone else or someone downsizing, except he can't actually find the next place that he wants to go to. And so it seems like what we need are developers that are focusing on these ends that are saying, hey, I'm going to make smaller places. We're not going to make a home run on each one. It's just going to be a bunt single, and then we're going to do it 4 times instead of one so that we make the same amount of money.
Yeah, I call it progressive and regressive scaling. If you look at it that way, progressively upward mobility, the beginning of your career, and then again regressive. Once you're done sort of raising your family. Like my mom, for example, lives in Connecticut. My father's passed. She's in 2,600 square feet. She lives in 3 rooms.
Yeah.
But she doesn't need that whole house. And at the same time, it would be a perfect house for the next gen, right? So where can she go? She's not ready for convalescence. She's far too healthy and not, interested in that. She's not going to be part of an active lifestyle neighborhood. And anywhere that she would move, her basis would be insanely more expensive. Her home is paid for. So she doesn't feel stuck, but she is stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we create that sort of movement, upward mobility or, regressive mobility associated with the next gen,
Mm-hmm.
one coming into the workforce, one exiting the workforce. We're just not
Yeah.
building housing like that.
Well, and I think it's often sticker shock for the people living in a 2,000 square foot home to recognize that with current pricing, they maybe get a 1,300 square foot home, and like how to reconcile with that. Seems a challenge. So I'm curious, if someone's living in a pathway community, what does that look like?
Yeah, so pocket neighborhoods. I'm a big fan of Ross Chapin. If you've seen pocket neighborhoods, they're
I
cottage
haven't.
courts. So it's a concept that is a walkable 2-minute cottage court. So, like for example, Hudson Commons is our first. We're calling it our Learning Living Lab. It's on 2.44 acres in Hudson, North Carolina. It's exactly what you think it is. It's grandma's ranch, traditional Euclidean style um, zoning. And Hudson came to us and said, "Hey, we want to stabilize for our civil servants. What would it take to attract a equitable partnership in a developer?" And we went back to them and said simply, "If you can help us with tap fees and you can help us with the rezoning for density, we can certainly start to build in, a pocket neighborhood that's within walking distance to downtown." And that's key. For us, a pathway community always has an adaptive reuse component to it because we believe in the fact that the greenest buildings are the buildings that are already built. So, part of one of our credos in terms of our site development or site selection process is adaptive reuse. The other is walkability, the option to walk to a downtown. It doesn't have to be a big downtown. Main and Main is fine. But the next generation and the older generation want that option to walk. So those two things are must-haves in terms of site selection. But then in terms of stable living, our holistic perspective is affordable housing, lowercase a, that's an ownership model. Digital equity, access to information is becoming, I think, a much more important commodity these days. So digital equity is huge. We will make sure that all of our properties are on net with the highest and best access to information and fiber. Um,
Well, let me pause on that one. So when you mean digital equity, everybody has access to high speed internet. Do they also get some kind of like a platform with their home that they know like how much it's costing to run per month or something like that?
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
so we will do dashboards. There's a whole what we're calling the distributed trust layer inside of our technology for the houses. What's funny is that you can exit your car and double click a button and your car goes to auxiliary and locks,
Yeah.
right?
Or not even push a button, you just walk away and the Bluetooth tells it.
Right, but our homes for some reason haven't gotten to that point yet. So, um,
Is that
yes,
because it's expensive to put that technology in, or
it's
builders
a
are lazy?
misnomer that it's expensive. If it's, I believe in, I'm a big fan of design theory. And if it's designed into the performa from the very start as a must have, not a nice to have, not an option, but
Hmm.
a basic feature, it just costs what it costs. So if you have to run your performa out longer, you have to run your performa out longer. And that's kind of part of it is that all feeds back into your total performa and how
Hmm.
long how long you're willing to wait to get your return. So patient capital is essential to our properties. But Yeah, so a baseline understanding of our occupancy, and our usage is absolutely necessary. We can't improve that which we're not measuring.
Right. Well, that was the second point. Was there a third one?
Food systems. So, a lot of our energy, is tied to our food systems. We're starting to see that, right? With all of the geopolitical unrest in the world these days, our food costs have spiked. We're starting to pay attention, I think, a little bit more to our ultra processed foods. We've got caloric dense food, but not nutritionally dense food. So, like for example, Hudson Commons, we have a common kitchen, community kitchen in the old house that we're renovating. That's designed to be connected to our CSAs. So all of our small local producers that are regenerative farmers or otherwise looking to create better distribution paths, not into the industrialized food complex, will be able to drop off a protein package and a veg package at the community. And folks that live there can prep or just distribute. You can choose to not be a part of it or be a part of it, but it really helps them centralize their distribution and not rely on that one Saturday farmers market to make $600. You've got 48 homes in one 2.5 acre parcel to deliver to. So that density really helps them.
Well, that's a lot. Before we move on to like the layout and everything, because I'm curious and I may want to copy you up here in Maine if you'll allow for it. But,
Sure.
my mom has always lived in apartments. And then more recently, she was in an environment that wasn't great. So we moved her into another building that had previously been more of like an assisted living facility, but the economics weren't working out because there was only 10 units in the building. So for them to pay for the overhead with just the 10, it wasn't working. So somebody bought it at market rate, but he left the kitchen in the community room that is in this building. And so anyway, we moved my mom into this apartment complex. And the reason I share it is just about this whole idea of community. My mom, she's now retired and so is kind of like looking for things to do. And one of the things she started doing was lunches on Fridays with these people, right? So there's her 9, other people that are staying in the building plus her. And so it's generally like a small lunch she can make for everybody for like less than $100. And this has brought like so much purpose to her life and so much like something to do. It's like when people go to AA and they're like, you're going to make coffee. And then they keep coming back because they're like, oh, I got to make the coffee. So this, I think, approach, it's tough because I do development, and to think about all these other layers that you need to incorporate in, I think it's overwhelming for developers, even if they are altruistic, which not all developers are, but many are. They're like, I just don't know how I'm going to incorporate this in and like deal with the management of it. Seems like it could be a problem and it won't work. But it seems to me that actually what happens is members of the community end up like policing that themselves, and it becomes like a bright, shining thing in that community. It sounds like that's what you're trying to replicate.
Yeah, Matt. Well, look, ownership, there's no ship like ownership. People have a sense of ownership. They will take care of things. We
Yeah.
don't need developers to tell us what we will and will not take care of. We
Hmm.
need to create communities in which there are self-help, there is self-care, there is autonomy. So, um, we're going to build a community kitchen that's nice enough where the next person that comes in wipes up the mess after them because
Hmm.
they own, not
Right.
because they rent. When you rent something, you don't necessarily take care of it the same way. And I think that we need to be a little bit more altruistic. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for developers to think differently when their pencils don't pencil. I keep my props right here. I have a golf pencil, I have an architect's pencil, I have a number 2 soft pencil, and I have a construction pencil on my desk
Why
all
all
the
the
time
pencils? We got to know.
because people are using the wrong pencil. If your model doesn't pencil, maybe you're using the wrong pencil. And, I truly believe that the communities of the future need to incorporate all of these things, not some of these things.
Yeah.
And the sense of ownership, I think, is the cornerstone to a lot of this.
So, a big part of your work ties the housing to financial predictability and long term economic resilience.
Mhm.
What are the biggest financial risks we homeowners face? We talked a little bit about it, like unexpected repairs, but there's a lot more to it than that. And how can the design and planning help reduce those risks?
Yeah. So, another one of our stable living model has sort of five pillars to it, so to speak. Financial literacy is a cornerstone to stable living. We're building to 80% AMI. So building to 80% AMI, if you hire a certified financial planner, they'll tell you that you need to no more than 25 to 28% of your gross income should go to your rent or to your housing. So that's exactly the model we're building to. So we reverse engineer our performance to that. So if we go to a specific area, we pull AMI, we look at, because we have a very specific end user profile, a nurse, for example, working full time, we can back into our numbers. That nurse that comes and lives with us is going to have access to a CFP because we're partnering with multiple different CFP companies across the country right now that want to get in early. We shouldn't have to wait until we're wealthy to manage our money. We should have help at the beginning of our career when we don't have money. That's when it's most important. So, moving into the stable living model, coming into a Pathways community, you've already signed up for something that's attainable, because if you won't qualify if it's more than 28% of your gross income. Secondly, you get access to a CFP that's going to start to teach you about like the cost avoidance of why you're building now because it has solar and defrays 40% of the cost. That $80 a month needs to be reinvested, not in something fun, not in Starbucks, not in a nicer car, but literally reinvested. So the whole model itself, along with the CFP, should what we hope will return at least some IRR, if not a fairly significant savings.
Mm-hmm. I love that. One of the bills that I passed when I was in the legislature was requiring students to pass financial literacy in order to graduate. And there's different flavors of this because every school district does it differently. We can't mandate that.
Right.
But just having the exposure to it's a big deal. And, I keep another letter on my desk from a group called No Kid Hungry Maine because we passed the first universal free lunch and breakfast in the country. California was a few weeks after. But it's like, how can people get better if they don't have good food and some money in their bank account? Like, I think then we're all just kind of hoping for like rainbows and sunshine here when it might not be, it's a cloudy day. Like, they need to know how to get through that day. And I feel like a lot of times we put people into these boxes and it's like 25 or 27%, but we're going to unpack how you could actually go up to like 33 because you're going to have access to some meals each week at a discount that are healthy for you. Probably going to see a reduction in some medical bills or expenses. Health-wise, it's better. You're also going to be tied up with a financial planner, which in my mind, as you're saying this, are you structured as like a nonprofit? Because that's, I think, where developers get hung up. They're like, well, I only know how to make money from the delta between what it costs me to build and what I can sell it for.
Yeah. There's a guy out there by the name of Indy Johar, and he's got a podcast. Actually, it was a talk on the Long Now Foundation, and he's out there publicly calling folks shitty capitalists. I hope I can say that. Can I say
That's
shitty?
all right. Yeah.
Okay. So he's calling people shitty capitalists. And his point is, if you're not taking value and benefit and societal structure and food systems and financial literacy into and digital equity into the mix, and all you're concerned about are the numbers not penciling and the fact that the money doesn't work and complaining that, we've got an economic problem, like, you're a shitty capitalist. And I love the reframe on it, because if we were truly good capitalists, we would care about all of that and take all of that into our system. So yes, the numbers matter for sure, but what matters even more is stable living. Stable living is like where the inflammation stops and where the stress stops and where rolling over in bed stops with where am I going to get my next meal, or man, my rent is due tomorrow, my mortgage is due tomorrow. And wage has been trailing, our income wage has been trailing the median home price for years. And the median home price only continues to inflate. As you might be a homeowner, understand, our taxes are not ever going to go the other way. Our maintenance costs are never going to go the other way. All of our costs associated with ownership are continuing to increase over time. And everywhere else too, our food systems, our childcare systems, our healthcare system, they're not even connected to the house. So housing is only a part of the model, and we have to think about this as an operating system, not just housing tied to capital markets.
Yeah, I love that. I think that it's definitely more challenging to do, but we're getting into an environment where we have to do it. I mean, capitalism by nature is asymmetric. Talked about this on this podcast before. It is a system in which there are people that know the rules and there are people that don't know the rules. The beautiful thing about America is people can avail themselves to learn the rules, you know, and we have that's a whole other podcast on the K-12 system and what we're doing to really teach people in a lot of ways that the system is broken. And yes, it is broken when you have a lot of shitty capitalists, to use your term, right? But it actually can work if people know how to do it and then use it to their advantage, because it was actually set up to try to bring more prosperity to people. Though now you have situations, you look at New York City as an example. Why did they elect who they did as mayor? I think a lot of it has to do with being told, I'm going to take care of these things for you. And they don't see a way that they could actually do it themselves. Not that they're lazy or don't want to, perhaps that's some. But I think the vast majority actually are very industrious people. They're just industrious on the wrong track, you know? And no one's like teaching them like how to switch the lever at the trip change station to move over, you know?
It's because we've optimized that system for efficiency, and we've optimized it to the dollar. It
Mm,
happened in the office space. You know, started this conversation with you that I was in office. We optimized the office to efficiency, and that's part of the problem. Late stage anything requires us to rethink systems, and of course, the econometrics have to make sense. That's like a given in a math problem, right? That's given X. That is absolutely has to happen. But then what? Like we have to get better at math. We have to start to understand that there are different metrics associated with housing, living, our social ecosystem, our food system, our financial literacy, whatever you want to bring into your particular model. There's more to it than simply capital markets at efficiency levels for NOI based on private equity. There's more than that.
mhm. Yeah, definitely.
But
I
that
mean,
model is really effective. Don't get me wrong.
well, I mean, your point is exceptionally well made. I mean, we have an office building with apartments up above where we have our office. And the reason I share this is when I first met with a group who needed to sign a lease in order for us to do the project, their main math and science alliance. And in order for the bank to say yes, they needed to sign a 10-year lease. So I was like, what do you guys need in your space? We'll make it happen. It's going to anchor the deal. Well, they said, hey, this was in 2019 when I first started talking to them. They're like, here's what we need. And we need these two rooms over here. These are Zoom rooms. And I'm like, what the hell is Zoom? You
Right.
know what I mean? And I'm like, okay. I mean, they were very forward thinking tech organization, right? Like we need Zoom rooms to do these meetings. And I'm like, okay, well, we're building it out then during COVID. I'm like, you guys are genius. Like you put into your office what's needed to now already do what now America is catching up to. And I think that that shift, this more nomadic kind of culture, if you will, has forced kind of the change where people built like in office, they build a routine and then they make you build your routine around coming into the office. So then you create behaviors around that and they try to create kind of a system in which you're almost like locked in because if I don't have this office to go to, then I don't have my routine of getting my coffee at the Starbucks on Tuesday at 7. And like that culturally, I think has been, and I'm curious what you think about this, like a difficult thing for us to reconcile. We're in downtown Augusta where we're at. A lot of times during the day, it's lower key here now because we've been very intentional about taking all the upper spaces of these buildings and converting them to residential. But a lot of these people don't actually work from home and they're going somewhere else during the day and not going to the sandwich shop on Water Street. So then the economic development team's like, all right, if we're going to have more residential, what are the uses we need to pull in that would cater to people that are mostly here like after 5 or on weekends, you know, as opposed to your traditional business?
Yeah, it's interesting. You could open a whole can of worms on the economic development side. Like we're in North Carolina. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. We happily accept 156 people a day in the city. So we have an infrastructure issue that's very different than a lot of places. You know, we have zero attrition and we have massive impact on our infrastructure, which as an elected official, I could imagine you can relate to quite a bit.
Yeah.
One of the problems that one of the opportunities that we have in our rural communities, which are not far away from here, outside of the exurbs, is that we have beautiful little towns. similar to New England, the Hallmark movies, so to speak, the Maine and Maines. And those towns have been struggling to figure out economic development for a long time. Where they're missing is what's called the missing middle. And I mean that in a product perspective, not missing middle class, not an income level, not an economic situation, but nowhere to live but grandma's house. There's a bunch
Right.
of 2,400 square foot brick ranch houses that were built post war in the 40s and 50s on an acre of land. And that is not an ideal situation for a single nurse or, a young couple that just doesn't want that lifestyle. So that missing middle product doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to take potentially a piece of property that the city owns, that's an arrow in their quiver that planning and zoning can think about, give it the proper density, make sure that it's walkable to downtown, you're going to increase foot traffic, and you're going to create products that are not currently on the market, missing middle products that are not on the market. So to get back to your first part of the question, what we're trying to do is we're trying to turn this process of house building into a product and then turn that product into a technology. And once we do that, we're going to drive the cost down over
Mm.
time. Now, this doesn't work universally across the entire spectrum of the economy, but it does work when you're trying to create a stable living model. What you want to do is create stability and drive costs down over time. That's a business person's perspective. I want to optimize housing into its most efficient form. And that means driving costs down over time, which is counterintuitive to capitalism and rate of return.
Right. Yeah, I think this actually brings up what I wanted to ask next, which is around like how can other people do this? So, because you've worked in different regions, and some are like more urban, like Charlotte as an example, to smaller, more community-driven areas. So, is this approach like adaptable everywhere, or what does it take to implement this kind of model at scale?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time making sure that folks understand that this is not a business, it's a model. Pathway Communities is a model, and I believe it's franchisable, and I also believe that it's open source. So I haven't figured out how to monetize it yet because I don't need to. That's what every good technology does. We put it out there first, we collaborate with different groups, we hit the umami, and then we join forces with the next one. We iterate and tinker. That's what America's supposed to do, building our way into the future. We'll find the money, it'll come. So it is definitely a model and it is definitely open source and it's definitely democratized. Every different area is going to have areas of resistance and areas that were a lot easier to put things through. So we all know the NIMBYs. We're looking for the YIMBY towns, yes, in my backyard. So
Yeah.
a progressive town manager is very helpful. A town council that gets it's very helpful. Um, and certain folks are trying to protect their investment in their assets or their historic district and look at something like this as a concern, a positive concern. So to answer your question, it is absolutely franchisable. It's absolutely a model. And I think that each unique opportunity comes with each township or each municipality to understand what tools they have at their disposal to help bring the right group to market. The example I give is Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A doesn't let the general contractor dictate what color tile is going to be in the bathroom.
Right.
They don't let the designer design what the drive-through is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
No one's changing the color of their sign. It's a franchisable product.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what I think this is at scale is we figure it all out as we go. And then we deploy at scale by telling people exactly how it's got to get built.
Yeah, I love that. And so I think that is probably a lot of the reason and why which a lot of outside the box thinking doesn't occur because it hasn't been like tested and vetted in a way that you can tell whoever's in the C-suite, if it's a big developer company or a smaller group, even operator, this is exactly how this is going to play out. You're going to build this number of, obviously your land costs and infrastructure are going to be different site by site, but roughly this is what you're looking at for economics on this deal. Here are the things you're going to put in. This is how much they're going to cost. Because what happens, I think a lot of times I've seen it with developers. They're like, that seems like a great innovative approach. And then we go to the next meeting and they're still like, that seems like a great innovative approach. It's like, you heard about it at the last meeting. Why didn't you do anything with it? And they're like, oh, we just haven't figured out how to make it work for us. Whereas we live in a society in which everything is consumer focused. It's like teed up for us. But there hasn't seemed to be, and maybe there are people, and I haven't met them before you, but people really working on, we're going to create, like, let's just call it a Chick-fil-A of housing development for 50 units and under. I'm just spitballing here.
Uh-huh.
And here's your playbook of
Yep.
exactly how to do that. You need to just go find the land and the willing political environment to pull it off in. The rest we know is going to fall in. Here's the rents that you can charge. Because, 80% of AMI, where I'm at in Kennebec County, is like $48,900 a year. So I don't know what it is where you are, but like you cannot afford a whole lot of house if you're by yourself at $49,000 a year.
Nope. That's right. And I think one thing that we have to think about is there's also, I would imagine, not an ownership model for a smartly designed 500 square foot efficiency with modern finishes in your town either.
No, and no comps to support it. So even if
Right.
I want to go build it, the bank's like, well, how are we going to substantiate that? We haven't seen anything else sell.
Yep.
And like, this is where so many deals go to die.
Yeah, and it's because it's always been done that way, and that's part of it is that we are in a time in America with a crisis in housing, and it's a stratified crisis. The first strata, the first layer, obviously, is the chronically unhoused. That's shelter. That's capital A affordable light tech projects. That's federal dollars, that's state dollars, that's local dollars. That's not what we're talking about here, right? Then coming down from that, you have some form of rental models that allow us to sort of live, comfortably in the private equity world of net operating income. We can choose a one bedroom unit monthly or annually for our term. The biggest problem that's really, really quiet is that attainable, affordable housing model that's an ownership model for someone who's just getting into the workforce. And the problem that presents is that we're not giving those folks who are our next generation of folks who are going to be taking care of us. I'm selfishly building this because I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and I've
Hmm.
got one studying nursing and I've got one studying nutrition science. They're
Hmm.
choosing not to get involved in banking and law and, higher paying jobs. It's just not what they're interested in. So I
Probably
look at
smart on law since AI is going to take about 80% of those
Yeah, right.
jobs.
Yeah, exactly. So, creating that missing middle product, that 500 square foot studio is not a tiny home on a trailer. It's a home that's on a foundation, right? So that takes care of that in a community that has some of these amenities that are not pickleball courts and golf simulators. The amenities are designed to create cost avoidance or capture additional value through compounding interest, whether that's food, whether that's free internet, whether that's our connection to solar. Down here, Duke Energy, one of the biggest things that, if I would get back to the infrastructure side of things, they're trying to reserve capacity because we've got massive growth. So when I approached our local utility, Duke Energy, they were like, look, man, we got all kinds of programs that we can help you with to get your switchgear from Schneider Electric. If you'll put a microgrid on site and lower the peak capacity of your neighborhood by 40 or 50% for us, holy mackerel, would that be helpful?
Hmm.
Well, okay. Is it gonna cost avoid 40 or 50% of their power bill? The answer is yes, it is. So there you go. Like those are the kind of partnerships
So
that
then
we're
you can
trying
go
to
to them and
create.
say the average in our market, it's Central Maine Power Company instead of Duke Energy. And a consumer might be like, well, I need to make sure that I can spend, $300 a month on my electric. And you're like, no, if you buy this house, we've modeled it out and it's only going to be like 150 unless you're running like a grow operation in there or something, which is
Right.
legal in Maine. People do
Right.
that,
Right.
but like, aside from huge user on electric here trying to run a tanning bed or something in your place, you're not going to be more than X dollars per month, with average TV, refrigerator, whatever AC unit running. And that is something that is like really, I think, why some people do flight toward rental, especially where utilities are included, because they can have a fixed monthly payment. Whereas in the ownership, that is usually open ended and scary for people. So they opt for rental when they might actually buy if they knew that their costs could be pretty well guaranteed for a
Well,
period of time.
let's pick that apart for a second. A traditional single family home developer doesn't have an incentive to care what your cost of living is going to be
None.
post occupancy, right? So they're not building to the enclosure standard. They're not using construction science. They're building to minimum code, and they're maximizing their efficiency, whatever their process is. So turning process into product at the highest rate of efficiency. So they're going to skimp. They're going to use whatever they can to do whatever they have to do to deliver a market rate product in absentia of the OpEx. They don't care what it costs to operate. Versus in that apartment building, when the asset manager calls the property manager and says, I better know exactly how much power is going into this building for the month because I've got an effective blended rate that I'm allowing people to live in that's all inclusive. So I want to know exactly how much my power is, and I want to make every upgrade I can to my enclosure standard to make my enclosure standard more efficient so that I can maximize or profit from and potentially a market rate kilowatt hour, right? If you're living in an all-inclusive environment, you better believe that the property management has a firm grasp on OpEx. And as a homeowner, I have a firm grasp on OpEx. So what if the developer theoretically built to enclosure standard, thinking about blower doors and ACH standards, and built to the highest enclosure standard rather than the lowest enclosure standard, and could guarantee the occupant, the member, the owner, that they would have close to a net zero power bill. That's called net zero energy home building. And it gets politicized, but it shouldn't. So I'm going to take the politics out of it, and I'm building to net zero energy.
I think that is a reason why it gets politicized is because it's living in an echo chamber of people doing things the right way, which normally goes something like this. West Gardner, Maine, population less than 4,000 people, does not have a building code officer. You go and you just start building something, okay? Next town over, Gardner, Maine, has a population of like 7,000. Since they're above 4,000, they're subject to the Maine Uniform Building and Energy Code. So those builders are going to the same gas station as the builders of the town next door that don't have this, and they're bitching at each other about like, oh, God, I put 2 inches of styrofoam underneath that foundation. Isn't that ridiculous? It added like $3,000 to the cost. Well, it is if you're living in just the realm of like, what is it to deliver this from a bottom line perspective to the consumer? But if instead you're able to do the math out and work with that consumer on that journey and like be involved with their lender to say, look, this home's got an additional 2 inches of insulation. So their fuel bill is not going to be like what it is down the road. Here, we've modeled it out. And this is why they can actually afford to pay a little bit more. But it's like going through the pricing exercise, building a business is always most difficult because consumers are trained to just look at the sticker price. Not like when you look at a sticker on a shelf for the grocery store that's got the price, but then right next to it's like price per unit. And you're like, oh, wow, that's $4.99. That one's $5.99. But this one's actually like twice as much per pound because they're only giving me like 3 ounces in the bag instead of 6.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like nobody really looks at that next unit metric. I'm a weirdo that shops by the unit metric on the price.
So do I.
So because we're going upstream, right? And how do we train more people to do that? Well, we have to lead them to the water. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying, look, yes, the house is $350 from the price point. That's $50,000 more than all the other houses, the same square footage. But here's where that extra $50,000 is going to benefit you. Like you're amortized, so your payments like an extra $200 a month, but you're saving $400 a month on fuel and electric. So you're ahead by $200,000, even though the house was $350. Am I tracking in the right direction with kind of like how this shakes out in the real world?
Yes, but right now, and this is what that's our basis of design. And our 0 to 1 Hudson Commons, our first learning living lab, is that there's not even a delta at that 50K
Really?
more. Well,
Wow.
we're using industrialized construction. So
Yeah.
we're not using a traditional stick-built general contractor. So down here, going back to infrastructure, because of the fact that we've got so much growth, we have absolutely zero bandwidth when it comes to subs. So we don't have a workforce right now that is qualified to go out there and perform the trades. So for us, we're seeing factories pop up, and it starts to make a whole lot more sense when you can create DFMA standards and enclosure standards at the factory and order a home, whether that's a kit or whether that's full volumetric. It depends on the site selection. It depends on, a lot of things like climate, weather, and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it allows us the opportunity to work towards performance metrics rather than code. And because code makes us lazy, right? You just said exactly a mouthful. Like if I don't have to, I won't. The code is the minimum compliant product you can put on the market. That's what most people build to. We are going to way exceed code because we're going to use DFMA in the factory, and we're going to tell our factory partners these are the enclosure standards that we want, so that when we do a blower door test, we hold them culpable that home came and performed at that level. And that's a different kind of basis of design.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate because I'm sure I'm not the first one. Chris, this sounds great. You're building utopia. We love it. We want more utopias everywhere. Okay, what happens when you do all this and then you make $17,000 and you could have went and did a whole lot more with you? You know, like I think it's going to be profitable. I'm sure you've looked at this, but I'm sure that there are people or doubters that like, hey, all this altruism baked into the way of a best practice, which I love, by the way, like it's actually not going to make money. And this is why you're not seeing it happen.
Well, I think that the part that folks don't know, and there is some trade secrets, obviously, there's always secret ingredients,
Sure.
In the pencils, is that when you put together music, a single percussion sound is not great, or a single brass sound isn't great, but, and you get to entropy, right? And it all sounds terrible until there's a conductor. But when it comes together, you have a symphony, right? Yeah. There's enough money in a project that's $12 million, that's 45 units, to go around if the capital stack is allocated correctly. There are people that have different...
You can do 45 units for $12 million that are fee simple units for people to own.
Yeah, that's where we are.
That's phenomenal.
Well, you got to remember, Matt, they can't live here forever. We're going to kick them out. So we're going to create
how does that work when you
we're going to create a financial flywheel with the deed restrictions. So that's part of the problem is you get roosters, right? So in a co-op situation, I was flying back from New York City a couple of weeks ago. I had a keynote at this conference called Juicy, which is co-working in New York City. And I was in line getting on the plane. And I don't know how we struck up a conversation, but this guy standing there, it was Chris, and Chris. There were 3 Chris's in a row when we went, the 70s. Moms and dads had like one Matt's and Chris's.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was the 3rd Chris, and the attendant that was taking the tickets was like, whoa, 2 Chris's in a row. And I was like, bingo, 3rd Chris. And this guy in front of me and I started talking while we were standing on the jetway. He's coming back from New York City. His family owns 2,700 units of co-opt affordable housing. And he can't get rid of them.
Well, because they know how to do math.
He's got rent control. And his costs of OpEx have spiraled.
Well, I just saw it, man. You just nailed it. This guy posted a video and he's like, my landlord called me and offered me $250,000 to move out of my rent stable apartment in New York City. And I'm going nowhere. Yes. Because look, I have my rent capped. So I know it'll never go. So I can run out a whole amortization on this.
Yes.
And by staying here for 7 years, which is what my plan is, I'm going to make $362,000.
Yes.
So I'm saying no to the landlords.
Yes.
$250,000 check.
Yes. In office space, they call it shadow space. So it's measuring what you don't see. And there's so much of that available in housing that people don't recognize, they don't see. So simply by putting together all of the recipes, so to speak, of all the ingredients that are elemental to housing, because of the fact you've got a little bit from here and a little bit from here and a little bit from here and a little bit from here, you start to look at that as an operating system or an ecosystem, and then you shrink and compress your capital stack. So you have one person of interest that has long-term benefit, like a foundation or a family office that has a mission. And you can start to think about things like land trusts and short, long-term or small, long-term rates of return, right? The town, for example, can be your partner. Like in my town, actually in Raleigh, North Carolina, I was just handed an RFP about 3 weeks ago and asked if I would take a look at potentially doing some infill development. It was 36 lots infill in Raleigh, North Carolina, and they were going to sell them to the lowest bidder as long as that lowest bidder was going to come in and develop them. And I said to myself, hang on, man, we have a farm. I would never do this with our property. Like, why would you do the constituents own the land. We already own the land. Is the property value going to go down over time or up over time? They ain't making any more land. It's Raleigh, North Carolina. So what are you thinking? Selling to the lowest bidder so that they can then build. And it becomes that conversation of economics versus inventory, right? And it becomes capital affordable or lowercase affordable, and it becomes disenfranchised or non-disenfranchised. And that's part of it, is the chronically unhoused. People start to use those words, and you've got blighted, underutilized or underserved communities, and they start to use those terms. But the reality is that land should never be sold, in my opinion. But our governments aren't in the business of development. So
they could just do a long-term lease on it or something.
They could give me access to the lease, just like I can get air rights in an office building, and I could build a 50-year, 75-year structure on it, and I could operate that property, OpCo, PropCo, and they could own the land. And we could pay them a small fee every time someone moves. We could pay, they just get mailbox money. That's what developers love. So they could actually be the property owner developer and just get mailbox money. We can build that into the pro forma. If I don't have to carry $1 million land acquisition cost, and they can help me with civil or horizontal development, maybe waive some tap fees, all of a sudden I've decoupled my land cost from my housing cost.
Right.
So again, I'm telling you too much, but you start to see what I'm saying. Like, there are plenty of opportunities to look at the capital stack differently.
I think you just hit on something that's poignant, because you're telling me too much now, but you're on a pathway to tell the world everything that you're doing, which I love. And I think what happens a lot, because developers are not like, there's not a lot of schools that train people in development. And I feel like what happens, and maybe this is just not reality, just my own perception, that there is a lot of keeping it in my own box, because if somebody else figures out my secret sauce, then I'm not going to be able to compete as a developer. And it's like, newsflash, people, there's about 7 million units short in the United States, or 4, whoever's numbers you want to look at.
Yeah.
So we can all be doing this, like every American, and we still wouldn't
I want
have
us all to be doing this.
but the reason they don't is because people are like, I don't have a formal training in this. I'm not a developer. So I'm probably going to mess it up, and I'll be out a lot of money and nothing ahead. And what you're proposing, I mean, this isn't something that I can go to a website and replicate tomorrow, but it seems like you're on a pathway that somebody could do that. So they're like, hey, I want to open a coffee shop. I could open a Dunkin' Donuts, or I can open a coffee shop. The people that go with Dunkin' Donuts are buying like all the testing and vetting and all the trials and tribulations that the person opening the mom and pop might just like not, they'll figure it out in year 3, and like they can't make it. They're in a cash flow bench, and then they're out. Whereas with Dunkin' Donuts, it's like you're only coming to the table if you know and you want to operate this model. And it sounds like what you're packaging together is how others might replicate that in different parts, or maybe you guys come alongside someone and do it with them.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of it, is that we'll figure out the financial model after we solve the problem. And looking at it as stable living, as an operating system, as housing or living as a operating system, starts to pick away at that. The reality is, just like agentic design or building right now inside of technology with our codex or open clause stuff, the reality is you still have to do it. So I can give you all the answers. I can tell you exactly what I did. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the words or the resources or the holistic knowledge to pull it off, then it doesn't matter if I give you all the answers. I'm giving you the answers and saying, write the test. If you don't have the ability or the proficiency, you can't write the test, even though you have the answers.
Right. Yeah. Well, I love what you're doing to really help democratize development. That's a big part of why we have this podcast. And we don't only talk about development, but it's a lot of what we do talk about. Because like what I said, even in the legislature, it's like, guys, we have these great LIHTC programs, but there's about 7 people that know how to navigate those waters. What about the people that just want to take a 1970s ranch and add a unit in the basement? Like, where is there help for them? Because if we have 1,000 people do that in 1 year in the whole state, that's 1,000 units. And the cost to the state's minimal. So I feel like a lot of times it's just people are not familiar with like, all right, I want to add a unit. That means I got to make the septic system bigger. How do I do that? I don't know, like they need a playbook.
Yeah. Charlotte, like for example, Charlotte, where I live, we've got about a 700-page UDO, Unified Development Ordinance. And I can go 30 miles to the east-west. Can't really go to the south. I can go 30 miles to the east or the west, and I can talk to a planning or zoning department that has 5 pages or 1 page or 3 pages. Some of those planning folks are in a county where they have 7 or 8 different towns that they only work 1 day a weekend. So what's interesting is that this becomes much more feasible in a town like that, in an area like that, than it does when you've got 600 pages of case law and massive infrastructure issues associated with density and population. So the cool thing about it, not only is it democratized, but it's ruralized.
Yeah.
I believe that it's an opportunity for the small towns to provide some of the relief of the pressure of the bigger cities. That coupled with remote work, we talked about the distributed teams at the beginning of my first form of my career. If we've got digital equity and we've got access to information and laser fast rural broadband, we can start to attract different people to town and different companies to town, right? So I would love to know that I could live stably for $2,000 a month in a planned community that felt like Melrose Place, that's a pocket neighborhood, that's walkable to a coffee shop or walkable to a co-working space, that had connection and access to food systems, right? My neighbors are always home, that's safe and secure, and know that I'm not going to be there forever, but that's okay. I'm eventually going to leave as a well-qualified 750 plus FICO score with 20% down, and I'm eventually going to participate in the traditional side of home ownership, just not yet. Or vice versa. The other side of being at a career point like me, I turned 50 this year. My kids are, in college and high school. I'm already starting to think about the family house and say, what are we going to do with this in 10 years? So to be able to have stable living on the backside of it, sell the house, release that back to inventory so that it's not an inventory problem that I'm holding on to for the next person to be here. And know that I'm going to be stable again at $2,000 a month, not having to worry about when the roof leaks or when the.
Are those people, when they sign up to do this in the community, are they entering into some kind of shared appreciation contract where if the value goes up, they have to give a percentage of that back?
Yeah. So if you're familiar with Habitat for Humanity's model, they have deed restrictions, and two of their deed restrictions. One of their deed restrictions is A, you obviously don't own the land. They've figured out how to decouple the value of the land from the structure itself. But B, there's a mandate that you sell the property. You have to sell it back to Habitat for Humanity. So if you ever leave, it doesn't go market rate. That allows them to protect that affordability and perpetuity.
That's where you're able to then do longer term internal rate of return, if you will, based on projections of how many units might sell in a year over a 10 or 20-year period of time.
Yeah, there's an insurance product, and some of these words are new, so bear with me, but that's part of this too, is like word sleuthing. There's a product in the insurance industry in the life insurance side called a return of premium policy. And basically it's a death benefit. It's a term policy with a death benefit, but instead of it being a forced savings account like a whole life policy or a term that just runs out, it's a return of premium. So for example, you have a $500,000 death benefit and it's a 30-year term and it's $500 a month or $500 a year. After 30 years at $500 a month, if you don't die, you get your money back. They've had the benefit of knowing that they've got stable income from you, $500 a year. And they've got the benefit knowing that they've de-risked that you're probably not going to die because you're 20 to 50, right? Yeah. So at the end of that policy, they've taken all that money that they've already borrowed. It's probably turned into tenfold whatever they've done on the backside of the investment to create that economic flywheel. And you live 30 years, congratulations, here's your check back, 30 years times $500. So that return of premium policy is something that we're looking at to sort of model it the same way, where when you leave, you get back what you put into it, at least, at a minimum. And potentially, depending on what happens with market dynamics, if we can measure GDP and CPI and look at the current market rate based on whichever market we're in, if we did better, we share in some of that too, right? So again, we're going to get a lot wrong. The first is a 0 to 1. It's a learning living lab. We're being very selective with who our financial partners are because we're trying to be very clear that this is not a market rate deal. But at the end of the day, it's very hard to argue for stability for our civil servants. So that's why we started there. Like, we need stability for the folks who serve our communities, or else they won't be here to serve our communities.
Yeah, the police chief was on a call recently that I was on in this community, and she's like, we cannot get anybody to work at the police station. They're like, why? Because they can't find any houses to buy in this neighborhood, even though we're going to start them at 70 grand a year for a salary. So, I mean, I think you're hitting right on it. And I think what you just said there, not like as a headline, but like this isn't market rate. There is a lot more that's going in on your end to put the pieces of the puzzle together, because the traditional model of buy the lot for 100,000, build at 250 a square foot, which would be a screaming deal anyway, and then put that out to the market, then that is missing the middle because like it's above where they're at in an affordability band. And what you're doing is you're saying, all right, well, we're going to do this agreement, that. I don't know all the details of it, but essentially you're putting together a model that also works, but it's just being done a different way.
Yeah, and it starts sort of in a way, in a pitch and tone that's different than traditional market rate development. We're not going out and buying the land and then hiring an architect to draw a schematic design. That happens. It just doesn't happen in that order. So we're really it's an ordinal problem, not a cardinal problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you're familiar with those words, it's really a matter of like looking at the order of operations and turning them around and saying, how does this really work first, and who are our partners? And if you go out and buy the land that comes with any entitlement or encumbrances, and whichever way you paid for it, irrelevant, well, highly relevant, and then hire an architect or an engineer to start schematic design, you're already kind of at risk. You're kind of already built yourself into a corner, or designing yourself into a corner. The operator, the architect or engineer, their responsibility is to get the project built at that point. So when you show that image, and you've been in public service, I don't need to share this at all with you. As soon as you show somebody something, dude, it's too late. Like they're gonna immediately love it or hate it, and draw every line. Like it comes out of the woodwork at that point. So having listening sessions and starting to talk about what's different and who we're building for, it becomes a lot easier of a conversation when you say, look, you've got a grandchild or a daughter or a son that's getting out of nursing school. Where are they going to live? Or your nephew chose to be a police officer or a firefighter, and they want to live and work in this community. And right now there's nowhere for them to live. Like, how do you have that conversation? When you present it that way in a public forum, it becomes a lot easier to absorb than we're going to build a 650 unit apartment building hanging over Main Street. Good luck.
Right. Yeah.
Good luck. Because someone is always going to hate that.
Well, this going upstream is very critical. I appreciate the work that you're doing to not only do this for yourself and your organization, but do it in a way that can then be shared with other people. Appreciate you taking the time to come on to the podcast today and unpack this. I've learned so much from you, especially on how to keep looking good with a bald head and a nice beard. So for those that are not watching and just listening, I'm trying to copy Chris's style over here. Really like what you got going. In beards we trust.
That's right.
But for anyone that really wants to follow more closely what you're doing and maybe do this themselves in their own, rural town somewhere in America, where could they learn more?
So I'm a fairly prolific poster on LinkedIn. I have my own feelings about folks that are not on LinkedIn, and I always invite people to join that conversation, because oftentimes the most important voice in the room is not in the room.
Yeah.
So LinkedIn, Chris Moeller, Moeller for sure. I also write on Substack, so I go a little bit off script. That my Substack is called Chasing Arrows. I like to push the envelope a little bit more there. I have a podcast called The Edge Report, From Bricks to Clicks. That's on Spotify and YouTube, which we should flip the mic and I'll have you on so I can ask you the professional questions instead of you being the host.
Would love to do that.
And then pathwaycommunities.org is where our model and our white paper live. That's probably enough. I've got 40 more websites and a whole link tree, but that should give people enough to get them going.
An entrepreneurial addict. I love it. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. We really encourage those listening to check in on those sources that Chris shared. I've gotten a lot of insight from your posts on LinkedIn. I often joke with people like Facebook is like a barbecue, but LinkedIn's like a cocktail reception. It's when people are really talking real ideas that we can rubber meet the road and do something. But to your point earlier, we can blab and talk all we want, but we got to go out and do. People need to go do things, whether that's simple as pulling the trigger on buying your first home, which is not simple these days, I should say, or getting involved in the conversations around policy. If you're not comfortable actually developing, show up to the planning board meeting, weigh in on why it's good to have the new housing development in your community. Like, just get off the couch and do something.
Yeah, I often remind people that this is not a process or a model that's coming. This is a model and process that is here.
Yeah.
We are doing this. So this isn't pie in the sky. It's not it is very altruistic, but it's also working. It's also utopian. So it's not something that isn't going to happen or might happen in the future. It's something that is currently happening.
Love it. Well, Chris, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And until next time.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you having me on, man.
Cheers.